We have been involved in the coevolution with these psychedelic plants for a really, really, really long time.
Remember how little you know. You're just a curious monkey after all.
Welcome to Curious Monkeys episode 2. Hello from the Amazon, my name is Luis, and today we have a very special guest, the legend Dennis McKenna. And he's famous because he's part of the McKenna brothers, these two guys that probably changed the world, at least the world of psychedelics and plant medicines. The story of the McKenna brothers starts with a trip to the Amazon in the 70s, a trip that was collected in a book called True Hallucinations, a book that I read when I was a teenager and blew my mind. In this book, these two little brothers, early 20s, they escape a convulsive America in the search of plant medicines, in the search of DMT, a potent hallucinogen from the Amazon. And the trip is kind of a heart of darkness, but with a lot of mushrooms, science fiction, aliens, esotericism, philosophy. It's just an amazing book that, at least for me, it opened so many doors and it gave me so much to think about. And it planted the seed for coming to the Amazon, the place where I'm living today.
So then we decided, well, where the gnosis must be is in the Amazon, where we knew there was a pristine Aboriginal shamanism based on hallucinogens.
After the book, I really got into Terence McKenna, and he was already dead, but he was like a ghost in the machine through the internet. All his lectures, books, articles were over the press, and I read them all. And the guy was just an amazing thinker, an amazing poet, and he was able to communicate and to put in words not just the psychedelic experience, but he was sharing the importance of all these substances through our history as humans, how we always been consuming mind-altering substances and how that in a way was part of our evolution. But we stopped and we got lost.
To my mind, human history is the story of one substance after another distorting or transforming human values and society. The people who hold that these psychedelic substances have no application have very little actual personal experience with them. It's the old story of my mind is made up, don't confuse me with facts.
So basically I became a fanboy. I did them all, the heroic dose, the 5 grams, the third hit, the machine elves, the DMT entities, and through all my 20s he was a really big inspiration.
Culture is not your friend, because what culture provides is a bunch of rules, so you don't have to think, and a bunch of myths, so you don't have to think again. Culture has all the answers, you know.
Creates consumer mania. It preaches endless forms of false happiness. It invites people to diminish themselves and dehumanize themselves by behaving like machines.
But the biggest surprise, and something that I couldn't expect, was that I was going to end up meeting his brother, Dennis McKenna. And I remember that it was a cold night of winter in London Real Studios when we had the first interview, an amazing interview that you can watch in YouTube today, and the beginning of my relationship with Dennis.
Ayahuasca has become my own personal teacher as well as my professional preoccupation. You know, ayahuasca is giving us a message about our screwed up relationship with nature. And what we have to understand is, number one, that we're not separate from nature, nor are we running nature. We're not in charge of this. You know, the plants, if anything, are running nature, and they do, if you look at the dynamics of the biosphere. And I think, you know, I think ayahuasca is coming onto the world stage and saying, you know, wake up, you monkeys.
After that interview, I made my mission to create a film about the McKennas in London Real. And during years I was hammering every day about the importance of this film. We tried different projects, we have a lot of iterations during the years, and this project crystallized in the film Reconnect, a film that I'm really proud of, a film that you can also watch in YouTube, and a film that was very special for me because we finally traveled to the jungle of Costa Rica, to a retreat center called Soltara. We spent 2 or 3 weeks with Dennis there, and it was there when I tried for first time ayahuasca. So can you imagine how that experience was from reading that book when I was a teenager to 10 years after me having my first ayahuasca experience with one of the Makenas? It was crazy.
You don't always get what you want with ayahuasca, but you always get what you need.
And during that film, Dennis was already mentioning ideas about a new project, the Makena Academy. This was going to be part of the film. Finally, that couldn't happen. But the Makena Academy really got my attention. And this is his new project, where he explores multiple ways of bridging ancestral knowledge with modern science. That was my last film in London Real. After that, I quit my job, traveled to the Amazon, got stuck in the pandemic in the Amazon. And I don't know if it was destiny, if it was the plans, or if it was just luck. But Dennis was interested in a film project in the same area where I'm living now, Iquitos. A project that we just finished to film. It's called Biognosis, and we will talk about it during the podcast. So yeah, it's been a blast to be along Dennis all these years. I know there is a lot of podcasts with him and a lot of content, so I tried to explore different narratives. We also got into the life of his brother and some conflicts that we observed there. And we talk about what is the Makena Academy and about our project. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And now I'm going to leave you with the original Curious Monkey, Dennis Makena. Thank you so much for this, very important for me. I named the show after one of your quotes, so you can imagine that very special guest here. So let's start. And I would like to
stole my aspiration. I was going to call it the Curious Monkey, but you beat me to it, so that's okay. My blessings, because I think it's a great title, but. Okay. I'll let go of it. I will not call my attorney because I really have no rights to it anyway. So, not that I would do that.
If you want to reclaim it, it's yours. It's okay.
No, I guess not. I have to let it go.
Okay. So I would like to start this conversation remembering one important man in history. And this is the first human that created fire from scratch. And I like to imagine him alone in this cave, in darkness, just rubbing the sticks. Focus, probably praying to the gods, to the spirits, to someone, to send them this gift, this power, the power of the gods. And probably angry, frustrated, hours and hours and hours, rubbing the sticks. And suddenly, fire at his hands. Can you imagine the surprise? He was the first magician, he was the first scientist, he was the first artist, he was the first shaman. Flash forward to today, we have fire at our hands, we have progress all around us, but on the way here it seems that we have lost something. We have lost the magic, we have lost the mystery, we have lost the connection with the living world. So my question to you is, what is to be done?
What is to be done? Well, I don't know if anything is to be done. I think that we're caught in the unfolding of evolution and the unfolding of history, and it may just be that we're along for the ride, and there's not a whole lot that can be done. And in a certain sense, things are in a very unsettled state right now. Planetarily, the planet is threatened. The social structure of all of these societies are under a great deal of stress. There seems to be, an ascendancy of authoritarianism. democracies are under threat. Certainly the planet is in a more delicate state than it's been for a long time, maybe ever in the history of our species. So, you know, there is all that, and yet at some point, or there is a balancing that. There is, for me, you know, this little still voice that says, remember, the universe is unfolding exactly the way it's supposed to. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's comfortable for us. You know, the planet as a whole, the biosphere as a whole, will protect itself and perpetuate itself. And it's not necessarily a decision. It's not a decision at all. I don't think the you know, community of sentient species that make up this entity called Gaia, you know, and Gaia has all sorts of connotations to it, and it can be kind of woo-woo, and you know, but the fundamental concept of Gaia is sound, I believe, in the sense that Gaia is the planetary accretion or conglomeration, I guess you could say, of feedback processes that keep the biosphere, that keep the Earth tolerable for life. Like I sometimes say, you know, Gaia is one tough bitch. You know, Gaia, life on Earth, will persist, you know, for indefinitely, but it may not persist in a form that we recognize, and it may not, and in order to preserve itself, it may have to excise this species from the system in the same way that you'd use an antibiotic or an antiviral to get rid of a pathogen. We have become pathogenic in the biosystem of the planet. This is the problem. So we can either change and wake up and try to do what we can, and the solutions are there. It's not that we don't know what needs to happen, you know, and we can either wake up to that and start, you know, actually doing something to correct the situation, or we can do what we're doing now, which is that we're pretty much ignoring it. And, you know, we get everybody's talking about it, nobody's doing anything about it. So now here we are, we're in the middle of it, you know, and we have, maybe people say, you know, basically if the radical changes are not made in the next 10 years, it will be too late.
Yes, I remember you said that just after we premiered Reconnect in London. It was the beginning of 2020, and say like this decade is the most crucial.
2020 to 2030 is really the most critical decade we've experienced as a species, because it will be within this period that we either wake up, begin to make the changes that can start to turn this thing around, or it's too late.
Just a couple of months after the virus, you know, like the decade started strong. But you also started strong this decade, and you are doing things because you have a new Titan project called the McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy. That is a first step into this thing that you were mentioning now, that we are not listening to Gaia and we are not in sync with Gaia. And this is, I come back to the guy of the fire. This guy was not just the first magician, he was the first scientist, and he was the first shaman as well. He was everything. And it called to my attention.
You know it was a he.
Oh, she, sorry. Sorry about that. You're totally right. And but you have, I want to start to dissect the McKenna Academy of Natural Philosophy, and I would like to start by the end. What is natural philosophy?
Natural philosophy is what science used to be. what science grew out of, essentially, but what it used to be before it became reductionist and preoccupied with quantitation and quantitative measurement and so on. And science in some way is a kind of an impoverished version of what natural philosophy was, because which still exists, natural philosophy still exists, but it's not discussed. It's not widely understood that science really is a subset of that. And the subset that science, constitutes, it's been forced to cut away a lot of the aspects of reality and our understanding of reality in order to come up with this basically useful but fairly impoverished model of what reality is. Reality is only what can be measured. Reality is only what can be quantified. So immediately, in order to get to that, we have to cut out half of our experience, which is consciousness. Science has still not figured out what consciousness is. We're still having debates, about whether consciousness even exists, and yet here we are, having a conversation, and, I know my consciousness exists, I think, therefore I am. I grant the same to you. I believe that you're a real separate entity out there with your own consciousness, not something I've dreamed up, in my particular fantasy. But we have to, develop, we have to return to natural philosophy and ask these broader questions, about that may not have mathematical answers or quantitative answers, but that are still important to ask the questions and try to figure out. And consciousness is a big one. It's not just a sort of abstract speculation on what consciousness is. I think if we can really come to an understanding of what consciousness is and where it fits in the scheme of things, it's more than just an abstract philosophical enterprise. It's essential to figuring out, how we fit into the scheme of things, and what is our destiny? Do we have a destiny? Or is it just the universe blindly playing out the thing with and there's no intrinsic meaning? This goes against, I don't believe it. This goes against everything I intuit.
And I think that this crisis and this thing that we are passing through is precisely the result of having a model that is not occupied of what is our place in nature. We are lost. So we are behaving.
Forgotten. We have forgotten our place in nature. And the psychedelics are important in this respect, because they can help us rediscover our place in nature. They've always been there for us, as allies, as teachers, and this has been, you start out with the shaman 5 million years ago. I would say it's probably not quite that long ago, but more like 2.5 million years ago, that we began to see what we think of as consciousness emerge, in the evolution of our species. If you look at the fossil record, as poor as it is, this about 2.5 million years ago, 2 million years ago, the fossil evidence is that in that period till the present, the complexity and the size of the human brain essentially tripled in size over 2 million years. That seems like a long time, but in evolutionary terms, it's a blink of an eye. Most evolutionary events play out over tens to hundreds of millions of years. In 2 million years, this primate species, evolved from a languageless, entity, a languageless primate, to a conscious species in a certain sense. And I do think that psychedelics had a catalytic role in that, in helping us understand, in the origins of the imagination. Any ecosystem where you've got cattle, you got mushrooms, because mushrooms grow on the dung of cattle. And mushrooms, unlike many psychedelics, they don't require a technology to be useful. There's no preparation process involved. All that is required is curiosity. And I think the early primates probably had lots of that curiosity, besides which they were hungry, and you see the mushrooms in the environment and, it looks delicious. And it is in fact delicious, I mean, maybe not our tastes, but delicious enough that this would be consumed. And I think that this really had an impact. It's not simply that we ate mushrooms and suddenly we became smart. I don't think it's quite that simple. But I think that the two things that we know now that we didn't really know about when my brother wrote his book, Food of the Gods, and kind of propounded this idea. One of them is the neuroplasticity issue, the fact that the brain does evolve on its own. Within an individual, the brain can change, the number of neurons, the neural architecture of neural networks and all that. Those are responsive to environmental effects, and also, and the mushrooms are one of those. And we see from some of the imaging studies and so on that psilocybin stimulates the formation of neural connections, both the stimulation of nerve growth and also the formations of highly enhanced neural networks. So that's an important mechanism in terms of the acquisition of intelligence, and the ability to construct an inner world, what I call the reality hallucination, and sometimes an inner world that is a model of the outer world. Of reality as such. We don't inhabit reality. We inhabit this model of reality. Mushrooms gave us the tool. Well, we weren't even using them consciously. It was just happening. But the consumption of mushrooms on a regular basis would lead to this enhanced function. Would enhance the neuroplasticity of the brain, lead to these. This increase in complexity and over relatively short amounts of time. So then also juxtaposed against, along with that, you have to talk about epigenetics, which I've been harping on. Epigenetics being a way for these acquired traits to actually be transmitted from generation to generation without invoking the usual mechanism, which involves, the gametes and mutations in the egg and sperm and that sort of thing, which is how mutations propagate in a population. But there's another way to do it now. That epigenetics is a way around that, where these environmental influences can actually be multi-generational. There's feedback from the environment to the genome in the individual and at the racial, even at the social level. So these are the two mechanisms, I think, that make the idea that mushrooms were at the heart of the origin of consciousness. I think it's moved the needle from, a plausible idea, a plausible but far-fetched idea, to most likely this is what was happening. But as it is, we're left to speculate. But I don't think it's unreasonable speculation.
It's very nice, very exciting, these new updates about the theory of you and your brother. And yeah, exciting times for for it. And yeah, I mean, it's not a secret that psychedelics were there. And I also remember when we were shooting Reconnect, and the McKenna Academy was being born. It was a project back then, and I remember to have a lot of conversations around the concept of the mystery school, and I found that fascinating because yes, there is a lot of indigenous use of these substances, but you put the focus of attention in the mystery school, that is something much more Western, that in a way is not as alien as the tribes in the Amazon. And this is something that it was happening in Greece, in the Eleusis and stuff like that. So yes, why is that important for you to call the academy a modern mystery school? Or maybe start to, what is a mystery school for the people that maybe don't know?
Well, the mystery, in the West, the mystery schools, which grew out of Gnosticism and things like Eleusis and the Dionysian traditions and all that. These were nature centered schools of thought, basically, particularly Gnosticism. Gnosticism had a much more realistic, I think, understanding of the human place in nature, and where we really came from. And it affirmed life, it affirmed ecstasy and sexuality and all of those things that are most important to us: sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Luis, those are the three most important things that humanity is involved in. The mystery schools acknowledge this. The mystery schools were often, they celebrated the fact of being alive. They celebrated ecstasy, and these altered states, and often in conjunction with that was like orgiastic kind of activity and all that. This is how humans were meant to live, essentially. And then along comes, Christianity. And initially, I do believe that Christianity, before it was called Christianity, but I think it grew out of these mystery religions. The Christianity came along in its present form, and somehow it went all patriarchal, and the men who wanted to control things and generally were jealous of feminine, of women's power. And women have incredible power because they control reproduction, and men couldn't take that away from them. But they found all sorts of other ways to suppress the feminine, and this was an extension of that. Look at how much of Christianity has to do with denial of sexual impulses, the denial. So you're denying biology. It's natural to it's built into our very nature to have sexual desire. That's what makes babies, ultimately. That's what drives generations forward. And so much of Christianity is devoted to suppression of that. What I don't like about Christianity, there are many things I don't like about Christianity, but it's basically, it emphasizes pain and sacrifice and suffering, that you have to endure this to somehow be saved. Christ died for your sins. Christ suffered for your sins. So we must suffer too. Well, wait a minute. Let's step back from that. The mystery religions don't say anything about how we were born into sin. There is no sin. There's no original sin that we have to make up for, that we have to somehow do penance for, for the rest of our lives. That's a shell game. That's a mechanism of control, of these authoritarian, patriarchal, top-down systems. They're designed to make you feel guilty for simply being human. Christianity is not a pro-life religion, it's a pro-death religion. It's all about how you have to suffer in this life to hope that maybe in the next life you'll be saved. You know, well, we don't need to be saved. You know, this idea that we have original sin, that we somehow have to be saved, is, not to put too fine a point on it, bullshit.
Yes.
You know,
that's a problematic idea, the idea of thinking that the better life is not in this plane. And that's interesting because for me the idea of a Gnostic was similar to that. I had read some books and maybe through popular culture, like even Philip K. Dick, movies like The Matrix, or even some speeches of your brother with the DMT as well. I always understood that Gnostics also thought that this plane was hell, made by a demiurge that has us enslaved, and that our purpose is to purify us, to transcend, and to finally reach somewhere else, the omega point, the singularity, whatever it is that is not in this plane. That the salvation will come after. That in a way we have to leave this plane, this beautiful planet, this Gaia.
But over the centuries, exceptional human beings have learned the secret of moving between the worlds. The Imaginatrix is the land of all dreams fulfilled. It's larger than you can imagine. It's a universe inside the human mind, and it's where the future is going. It is where our destiny lies.
And for me it was a big breakthrough to understand that these mystery schools were about this plane, were about finding God in nature, and I see that as a big problem that we carry with ourselves even today, that we are not, like we are kind of having this programming in our mind that we can consume Earth, just use it as you want, it doesn't matter because something better will come.
and Christianity reinforces this, right? Christianity says, you don't have to value nature, you don't have to preserve it. Nature exists to serve us, and it's perfectly okay to exploit it, deplete it, and even to kill it, because our reward is in heaven, right? Well, that sounds like a shell game to me, yes. A con game, I guess. I'll take this world. If there happens to be a better next world, then that's fine. But believe me, I'm not counting on it. I think we have to live to the fullest that we can in this world, and be kind to each other and be kind to nature. And that's how we live a happy life and a fulfilled life. And, and coming back to, this issue about human destiny that we were talking about earlier, I don't know if there's a human destiny. I don't, in the grand scheme of the universe, I'm not sure if there's a human destiny that we can say, but we can, in some ways, create, as a species, we can create our own destiny. We can say, live with kindness, live gently on the earth, be kind to each other, be kind to nature and everything, and within our own framework of what is satisfying and fulfilling, we can try to live that way. Does it make a difference in terms of the larger scheme? I don't know that we have the answer to that. I would like to think.
Me too.
I just don't know, Luis. These are big questions.
Exactly. I'm going to reflect a bit based on my own experience and coming back to this idea of transcendence. When I started, influenced by you and your brother with the DMT and all this discourse, for me it was much about going to the bizarre, the weird, to meet the entities, the aliens, and as I start to, as I came to the Amazon, I start to work with ayahuasca. My focus changed, and I didn't force it, but I found myself much more rooted in this reality. It's like every day I'm less interested in these bizarre worlds, in the bizarre, in the weird, and more in these simple lessons of what a human is, in the more primal. And this made me think about your brother, with because we listen a lot of Dennis with the DMT, but not a lot about ayahuasca from him. And my question is, why do you think he always preferred the DMT, or if he did?
That's a very good question. And I think on some level he preferred DMT because it was 10 minutes and you're done. In a certain sense, or 20 minutes and you're done. It was a quick, essentially poking your head through this parallel plane into this other dimension and looking around, and seeing all this weird stuff going on. But then you get to pop up back into ordinary reality. And it's like, you can come back with a sense of astonishment from DMT, but you don't come back with a lot of noetic content, in the sense that all of this stuff that now I have to integrate, now I have to think about it. I have to puzzle out what made sense, what I learned from the experience. And like you do with ayahuasca, ayahuasca always leaves you with a lot of food for thought, generally, and trying to integrate it, they call it, try to think about what happened and what does this mean? How does it fit into the rest of your life? And all of these things. DMT doesn't place those demands on you so much. You can have that experience and you can say, holy shit, what was that all about?
There's this very defined sense of bursting through something, a membrane, and on the other side, a whole bunch of entities waiting on the other side. The whole thing is going on in this very high-speed mode where you're being presented with thousands of details per second, and you can't get a hold on. You say, my God, what's happening? And you're now at minute 6 to 7, and you come down, and it's like being more loaded than you've ever been. It's like about a 700 mic acid trip, but you embrace it as totally down. You say, I'm totally down. You look like a termite from Arcturus, and the room is decorated in Amish quilts, but I'm completely back. And then, over a minute or a minute and a half or so, the room just comes right back together. And 4 minutes after that, some people can give no account of it whatsoever.
But you don't really get much more out of it than that, because there's not time to spend in that place to really explore it. This is why we went to South America in the first place, was to look for an orally active form of DMT that we thought we could spend more time in that space and learn more. And that intuition was more or less correct. We didn't realize at the time that that's what ayahuasca was. Mm-hmm. Nobody really knew about the pharmacology of ayahuasca at that point. But so we went looking for this Witoto thing, which was Ukuhe, which was similar. But actually, when we got Ukuhe, it turned out to be not so impressive. But then we discovered the mushrooms on the same trip. And mushrooms are, in my opinion, I think they are the perfect orally active form of DMT. They're, psilocin is, psilocybin's converted to psilocin, and psilocin is 4-hydroxy DMT. and it's that trivial molecular difference that makes it orally active and very compatible with human metabolism, and yet still a kick-ass psychedelic. It'll give you everything that DMT will give you, but not as fast and in a more digestible, in some ways, a more accessible way. But as you know, you've probably taken high doses of psilocybin. It's a lot like DMT at higher doses, and that's because it is DMT in a certain sense. So I've come to think that psilocybin and psilocin, with the active form, is really the ideal form of DMT, and ayahuasca as well. But ayahuasca, can't be limited to that. So much of ayahuasca also has to do more with the mind, the body, as much as the mind. It's more mind-body medicine, and psilocybin is more cerebral. Not so much about the body.
Yeah, and what I'm learning here, since I'm involved with Amazonian medicine, is that for some of these cultures, DMT is almost secondary. It's like the perfume for the visions, but the healing happens with the vine. And I remember once in the camp, we drank pure vine, and I have full-blown visions as well. Like it didn't have chacruna on it, and I had the visions. And I see that the conversation around DMT and ayahuasca thing is changing, no? Do you have some input or something to share about these things?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think as we explore these things more and learn about them, the visions, I mean, often, as you say, in traditional context, the visions are literally eye candy. They're kind of like the screensaver, and beyond the screen, the really interesting things are going on, and it may be that the screensaver, which I enjoy as much as anyone else, but it's kind of like going to the dentist, I mean, they'll put the headphones on, they'll put you something on the TV and you're watching it, and you're distracted by all this, but the real work is going on, in your mouth, but you're not paying attention to that because you're paying attention to the, to the pretty colors and all that. I think that there is a lot of that to DMT and ayahuasca. I mean, ayahuasca, like you say, is not reliably visionary. I mean, it's great when it is, but that's not what it's about. You can have an ayahuasca trip with almost no visions and really get something out of it. And then, as you point out, you can take preparations of ayahuasca with no chacruna, and you can have a highly visionary experience. And what's that about? Because theoretically, pharmacologically, that shouldn't happen, but it is happening. So, I think what it comes down to, Luis, is we've got a lot more to learn about these medicines, and in the case of ayahuasca, particularly the beta-carbolines, because that's the other component of it, and we haven't really plunged into that to the degree that we should. We think of the beta-carbolines as being the MAO inhibitor that enables the DMT to become active. But there's a whole pharmacology of beta-carbolines behind that. And now we're beginning to kind of realize that and pay attention to that and try to figure that out. I've been talking to a couple of young men that have started a new startup company, and they are focusing on beta-carbolines, and they are taking beta-carbolines in harmine and harmaline and so on. I've never really worked with those things by themselves. I've always used them in combination with DMT, but they assure me that there are some very interesting effects from these things. So like everything else, we're learning. We've got a lot to learn from these things still.
Amazing. It's amazing. We don't know shit. and let me ask you, when was the first time that you have an experience of ayahuasca in the context of the Amazon and Amazonian shamanism? Do you remember?
Well, it was in 1981 when I went there as a graduate student, and so I was there to research ayahuasca, ukuhe, and whatever else came to light, and I went to a shaman who Terence and Kat had contacted a few years before, this gentleman in Pucallpa, and named Don Fidel. And I contacted him, and I was very lucky. I was very lucky that they had been there first, and this guy was the real deal. He was not a charlatan. He was a real, genuine ayahuasquero, and also very kind. Because you can imagine these two young graduate students kind of stumbling into his courtyard one day, barely speaking any Spanish, and saying, "Okay, we're here to learn about ayahuasca. Teach us all you know about ayahuasca." We didn't quite that up front, but we were respectful. But it was kind of that conversation that we're hoping to learn from you. And he kind of looked at us and he said, "Okay." and we ended up staying with him and taking ayahuasca quite regularly for a long time. And not only that, but he and his helper Don Jose, who was actually his uncle, they knew enough about science that what we were there for, so they were happy to show us how to prepare it, let us document that whole process, make samples, take them back to the lab and isolate them and so on. But I have to tell you, initially, the first few sessions that we had with him, not much happened, and I think one of the reasons that not much happened is I would let it happen. It was a classic situation of stranger in a strange land kind of thing. The whole thing was so alien to me and so unfamiliar, and it's not like I was threatened. I mean Don Fidel was anything but threatening. Powerful, yes, but you could tell that he had a benevolent spirit, that he was really a good man. He was the real deal. So it wasn't anything about him. It was about my own lack of trust and worry that I would lose it, that I wouldn't be able to handle it. And of course, I had my experience in La Chorrera in 1971 to go on. So I said, I really do not want to go through that again, so I wouldn't let it happen. And a lot of my initial trips were not very strong. But then as time went on, as I got more comfortable with taking ayahuasca and also comfortable with him, then the visions, and the other aspects of ayahuasca began to manifest, and I understood it because I was not so concerned. So it took a good dozen sessions before it began to really happen for me. And then it did. And then I said, oh yeah, I get it. And I get that, that it's not the same as mushrooms, and it has its whole own personality and so on. So that's what it was for me.
And also was different, I guess, that your experience of La Chorrera is that now you have a shaman and you have somebody guiding the experience through the Icaros, through all this stuff. That this is something that
I mean, the whole thing about La Chorrera, something that set it apart was that it wasn't within any traditional context. I mean, the mushrooms are used in a traditional context, but there at La Chorrera, they were not. You know, I mean, the Toto didn't care about. I don't know if they even knew of their properties. They probably did because they grew there, but there was no tradition. You know, we were making this stuff up as we went along. Yes. You know, we were creating our own mythology, essentially, which of course had more to do with science fiction than shamanism.
But exactly, but that also is very interesting because that extends as well to the message of, not the message, the legacy a bit of Terence, and your legacy is, it always put a lot of emphasis in the individual and in the substance. Even the heroic dose is you alone in darkness, you take it, you go there. And then a famous statement about gurus, follow plants. And I think that's amazing, yeah? That's it puts a lot of power on you. But also, it seems that Terence was not really interested in the whole shamanic envelope, in the whole shamanic surrounded of the... And I have something stuck in my mind that a shaman that you know, that I cannot say his name, but told me once, and he said me, look, ayahuasca is not a substance. Ayahuasca is the substance, the brew, is the Icaro, and is the lineage of the curandero. If you cannot separate these things. If you separate them, you will have some effect from the ayahuasca, but call it another thing. That's not ayahuasca. And that's very interesting in comparison with what I just said about your brother and the empowerment of the individual. So, how do you feel about this statement and about how do you feel about this?
Well, I think that's accurate. You know, I think that he was, it was very much about him and about an individual experience, not requiring a context, a group setting. Or the Icaros or any of the setting attributes that usually go along with taking ayahuasca. And actually, to be honest, I don't think he took ayahuasca very much. Especially, I mean, he did in South America, but I think in the States, I mean, he lived in Hawaii. He grew ayahuasca. He made very strong ayahuasca. He was very happy to give that to people when they came to visit him. I don't think he drank it very often. You know, I mean, I don't think he drank it. Same way that he didn't take DMT all that often. Mm-hmm. He was very happy to give it to people and then sort of be the clinical observer of what they went through. And, but he didn't grapple with it the way that he could have, and he didn't really buy into the traditional shamanic practices around ayahuasca. Otherwise he would have, been more into it. He would have spent more time in South America with somebody like Don Fidel and done dietas and done all of these things, and he didn't do that. And I think there was I think there was a certain reluctance in some ways. I think that, and the same is true of mushrooms. Mushrooms was what he primarily took on his own in Total Darkness and all that. And he was focused on the other. He was focused on the alien aspect, the entities, the whole sci-fi aspect, other dimensions and all that, and not so much the cultural context and not so much about himself. I think, when I think at some point his relationship with the mushrooms changed, and he was getting experiences, I think, that were much more about the self and about himself, in the sense of inviting self-reflection, self-examination. This was very uncomfortable for him. I think it was quite frightening for him, actually, and he stepped away from it, and we had discussions about this. We actually had arguments about this, because I used to say, you're the chief, public spokesman for DMT and mushrooms. You're out there on the lecture circuit talking about this stuff, but you're not taking it. So what's the problem? And he, that criticism was not welcome. And he was angry in some ways that I would even bring this up. But the fact is, I sensed a cognitive dissonance there, and he's not facing something that, he should have faced. I mean, these psychedelics are a mirror, they hold a mirror up to you, and sometimes it's hard to look at them. Sometimes you don't like what you see in that mirror. And I don't think anybody is, nobody is perfect. I don't think anybody, I think everybody can get to that uncomfortable space. It's a question of what you do with that. And the initial impulse is to push it away. This is not what I bargained for. This is not what I asked for. But these trips are opportunities, I mean, the whole thing, I say this again and again, this is my total shtick with psychedelics is they let you step out of your reference frame temporarily and examine your existential situation from a perspective that normally is blocked to us. Well, but that's an uncomfortable process. That can be not so pleasant if it's showing you things about yourself that you'd rather not acknowledge.
Definitely. They are not magic pills.
They're not magic pills. The magic is in us. The magic is in us and what we do. And I'm not saying I can sympathize with Terence. These experiences can be terrifying. And I'm not saying that I have always done the best with them, or I mean, we all have a lot of doubt and a lot of fear, basically, and what you have to do is you have to trust yourself enough to take it, and you have to have courage. This is what's called for to use psychedelics, particularly if you, I wouldn't even say if you're a newbie needs courage to take psychedelics, but somebody that's been taking them for a long time needs courage too. It's a matter of courage. You have to trust the medicine, you have to trust yourself, and you have to actually, in some ways suppress the fear, put it aside, or don't let it become what controls. If you're gonna step off the cliff, if you're going to jump off the cliff, just have to have faith that the parachute's going to open.
Nature loves courage. It shows you that it loves courage because it will remove obstacles. You make the commitment, and nature will respond to that commitment by removing impossible obstacles. Dream the impossible dream, and the world will not grind you under. It will lift you up. This is the trick. This is what all these teachers and philosophers who really counted, who really touched the alchemical gold, this is what they understood. This is the shamanic dance in the waterfall. This is how magic is done. It's done by hurling yourself into the abyss and discovering that it's a feather bed.
No, I also empathize with Dennis, and with Terence. I'm not criticizing anything. I'm just reflecting on how everything is unfolding. As you said, I think everything is unfolding nicely. And you can see that he was just the voice of his generation, and a generation that maybe they didn't have all this focus on the tradition and the indigenous tradition. That maybe is one of the reasons why it failed, like before. But now, when everything is happening, there is a lot of eyes putting on this traditional use. And this is where I want to talk about our new project, the new project of the Academy, that is exactly that. It's this film called Bionosis, A Bridge to the Ancestral Knowledge, a film that we just finished to the phase 1 of shooting, that I'm very happy to participate with you and your academy. So tell me, first, we talk about Gnosticism. So tell me why you choose this name, Biognosis, what that means.
Well, gnosis means knowledge, right? And bio means life. Life knowledge is what it means.
And it's the knowledge of nature, right? It's the knowledge that is there. And in the project, we discover people trying to preserve this knowledge. Many different people. So tell me how this project started. How was the first idea?
Well, it has a couple of different threads to it. One is that in 2004 from 2008, I had a grant from a foundation in the States to investigate traditional Amazonian medicines potentially for treatments for schizophrenia and things like that, and cognition and dementia and so on. So that grant enabled me to sort of reactivate my connections to Juan and the people in Peru that I'd worked with back as a graduate student. Then flash forward 5 years, in 2010, I got a grant through Botanical Dimensions, which was the nonprofit that my brother and his wife had started, to do this herbarium digitization project. Well, we really had no idea what we were doing. We went down there and immediately, it sort of became clear that it was out of our depth, that we didn't really have a clear idea how to approach this. And there were a lot of challenges that even though we had the grant, we couldn't really overcome. But the idea of digitizing the herbarium was a good idea. We just didn't know how to go about it. This is the core of this idea of bridging ancestral knowledge, and scientific knowledge. This is how we can do it. And also, trying to document to some degree what this amazing fellow Juan Ruiz knows, which I believe he knows a lot.
Through the process of filming this, it became clear that, this herbarium was a kind of the symbol, of the state, of the interest on this. The herbarium is completely ruined. There is piles of all the mounted plants. Some of your plants, White Davis, they are just in the corner. They don't have space. They don't have mediums. And Juan is in this quest with all this passion, all this dedication, but he needs help. He needs somebody to help. And through Juan, we discovered.
So this is exactly what it is, as you say. It's like an example of the situation and how it can be maybe saved.
The good thing about this project is how it unfolded, because Juan, he's amazing linking people and finding the where the people are. So suddenly we, through Juan and through Juan's world, we discover so many different people preserving this knowledge. And it's amazing because we have the people from the university, the scientists, but as important, we have the woman that is selling the plants in Pasaje Paquito. We have the housewife of the community that is curing with plants because they don't have money to buy pharmaceuticals, or they live so remotely that there is no ambulance. And also we have curanderos. These are the people that they are keeping this tradition alive. But what struck me the most, and this is something that I also experienced in my life in the Amazon, is how these normal people in the communities, you don't need to be a curandero, yeah? They live in this animistic mind where they speak to plants. The plant appears to them in the dream, to the wife, say like, hey, you need to use this and you need to use that, and it's like this magical approach to reality. that is going to be hard to integrate for us, like when we are going there to patent all these plants and to try to do our remedies. How are we going to bridge these two worlds? This is maybe where I was going with the example of the guy with the fire, like he was a scientist, but he was also a magic. It's like we need to come back a bit to that if we want to keep going forward, at least with this ancestral knowledge. Because I also observe other things very interesting, that is like the curanderos and the womans, they respect medicine, and they agree that medicine works and that doctors works, but the doctors, they see this as primitive. They will never believe these superstitions, and there is an amazing conflict there that I don't know how it's going to be resolved. What do you think about this?
Well, I think what I hear is you say, the curanderos, the housewives, the people that work in, that rely on these herbal medicines, they also respect conventional medicine, but they don't have access to it. And conventional medicine does not respect the traditions. Conventional medicine, by and large, although there are doctors with medical training that are more open-minded, but conventional medicine doesn't take the opportunity often enough to remind themselves, where did all these remedies come from? They came from plants originally. Medicine grew out of this plant knowledge, but medicine now, as it's practiced, doesn't want to acknowledge that. And I guess you could understand, it's like, well, it's all based on superstition, but in fact, it's not based on superstition. The curanderos, the housewives, the people that use these things, they are scientists in a certain way. They're experimentalists. They don't work like we think of scientists, where you gather data, you document things, you do controlled trials and all this. But they do a kind of a science in the sense that they say, well, we are familiar with, this universe of medicinal plants, and they're willing to try whatever might work. And that's ultimately, that's a very scientific approach.
Yeah, and this is important because we are living in a period where, like all these psychedelic clinics, and we are taking the psychedelics to the clinics, and we understand and we don't understand. Like there is, for example, a lot of emphasis now in keeping the mystical away from the clinic and doing everything. But when you go to these remedies, this is two things that goes hand to hand. So it just touches many different questions that are going to be very relevant with all this psychedelic renaissance. And yes, let's see where this goes.
Yeah, I think well, this is part of the process, because of bringing science and tradition together, because this collection of knowledge of the plants, for these people, it's something that's lived. It doesn't come out of books. It's not about, herbarium specimens and all that. That's all important. That's part of the Western science part of it, and it's valuable. How the herbarium, as you say, is such a perfect example of the state of flux of these traditions, and it's almost, the story behind the herbarium is also the story of people like Juan, who've lived in Iquitos all his life, and for whom, the herbarium goes back, well, more than 50 years. I mean, I've known him 40 years, and he was involved in the herbarium before that. So there's him, and there's the story of all the botanists and other people that have gone through Iquitos over time. And he's been like the keepers of the gate, and the keeper of the gate in a certain way. the gate to the other worlds, and he's the guy that can bring these people out to the field like me, complete idiots, totally clueless, and take me out there and actually do some productive collection. I mean, the man has sponsored, he's responsible for so many PhDs, it's hard to imagine. Yet he himself has no credentials in that way. He's got a degree in forestry. Amazing. So he's a kind of a bodhisattva. He's kind of a very wise man, and he knows this, and he lives the story. He's living his own story, and his own story is entangled with so many people that have come through the herbarium for whatever reason. Their stories have been interleaved into his story. So it's quite a thing, really. And this is one reason that one of many reasons that it's important that we try to document this stuff, because one is not that much younger than me, and so he's getting a little long in the tooth, as we are all, and he's not going to be around forever. So it's important to try to document in some ways this knowledge that he has, because he will not last forever. I hope he lives to be 100, and he may well, but it's important to do what we can.
Nice, definitely. So last question, and another part of this bridge between cultures, and a part that I'm really involved with, and I know that you are also a bit involved and conflicted, like everyone that is involved with this a bit, that is like all the ayahuasca tourism, call it. So it's a complicated world, but I choose to work here because for me it's being in the trenches of this exchange with the ugly, the good, and the bad, but I can see how these things happening. I see a lot of beautiful things as well. I was thinking the other day, now that a lot of these dietas are being very popular, Westerns go in dietas, in our camp, maybe every month we graduate in dietas like maybe 40 people or more. And this is incredible. This is incredible because if you think about it, before this boom, who was doing dietas? Maybe 2-3 guys in a town in the Amazon. So in a way, a lot of people are having amazing relationships with plants So I think that must be positive. But of course, I'm conflicted about appropriationism, about a lot of the things. So I want to just hear your thoughts on this in the ayahuasca tourism. On how you see this going. What do you think about it? How you feel about being?
Like you say, it's multifaceted. There are many beautiful things about it. There are many problematic things. It's not, it is complicated, because it's creating changes in the tradition. That's inevitable. I mean, in some ways, these things are market-driven. People come to South America; they have certain expectations, and the market is going to respond to that. And that's okay. There are, I think. Well, one of the beautiful things about ayahuasca tourism, one of the good things is that people come, and these are not people looking for kicks. They're looking for answers. They're usually very sincere, and they're looking for either, answers to specific problems, mental problems, depression, addiction, this sort of thing. Or maybe they just are interested in spiritual discovery and exploring consciousness and all that. That's totally legitimate. That's a natural human impulse. And if they find the answers by coming to these retreats, that's a good thing. I mean, the negative parts are more about what this does to the economic situation. Of course, the economic inequality is problematic in some ways. I mean, basically, you kind of have to be a privileged person to come to South America and seek these kinds of experiences. But that's, just because you're privileged doesn't mean that you can't approach it in an ethical way. It creates jealousy sometimes in the culture, as these curanderos become, superstars and they make a lot of money, and then there's a lot of resentment that comes from that. So it's a dynamic evolving kind of situation. There are good and bad aspects to it, and then the other thing that is really important is the overuse, the depletion of ayahuasca populations and so on, putting a lot of pressure on everything, on the environment, this ayahuasca tourism. So if I were a world dictator, if I could say the way it's going to be, what I would say is much better to have places in North America or Europe where this could be done, retreat centers that could operate in the open, without any legal concerns, and then work with indigenous people to produce the medicines in South America, bring the medicines to North America or Europe or wherever, but have it mainly run as much as possible, at least on the production side, by indigenous people, and maybe curanderos could come up. So reverse the equation. In other words, right now it's all about people are coming to the medicine. Bring the medicine to the people. That's what I would say. That's how the ayahuasca tourism thing could evolve in a way and discourage people from coming, not, things like prohibition and, you must not do this. Those kinds of things don't work. But I think to encourage people to, if the opportunities exist to seek these kinds of experiences in North America using indigenous medicines with the help of indigenous people, that's a better model. I mean, and I say that from the standpoint of somebody, who has promoted ayahuasca tourism, who's participated in it. And, with Christina, we've worked a long time on this. And I don't feel guilty necessarily, but I feel like maybe, I've gained a little more clarity on some of the negative aspects of this. At the same time, I feel good that we've done this, and that the people that we've brought to these retreats have really benefited, and then go out and share their wisdom with other people. I think, one thing, Luis, I think we have to, all of this is taking place on the cultural and social level. And, that's where the issues are. But you also have to look at it in terms of, you have to look at it from the broader perspective that this is really a co-evolutionary process. We're co-evolving with the ayahuasca, with these psychedelic plants. And we have been for, whenever you want to start counting, 2 billion years. Let's put a marker down there. We have been involved in the co-evolution with these plants for a really, really, really long time. And so the time frames that this process works itself out are extremely long, so we can't, we can't, if you're looking at a time frame of, 50 years, 100 years, that's a very short amount of time. And inevitably these traditions are going to change. And that doesn't mean that they have to be lost or they have to be ruined or they have to be corrupted. They can evolve into something, that is a fusion of the best of science and traditional medicine.
Yes.
That make any sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, shamanism is about transformation, and it transforms itself. And I see the same. Yeah, it's a big process, and we are not running the show. Somebody said
we're not running the show. Yeah, that's the first thing we have to recognize. The plants are running the show, and I think it comes back to what we talked about at the start of this, which is that the universe is unfolding exactly as it's supposed to, and it's not necessarily transparent to us, what it's happening, but it is happening. So I have a certain amount of faith that this is going on, and I would like to hope that one day it will all be clear, But even if it's not, that's okay too.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's okay too. We have to be able to live with uncertainty.
And we have a choice, that is, or have faith or have fear, right? And I'd rather have faith.
Exactly. I'd rather have faith than fear. Yeah, exactly.
Dennis, thank you so much for this. Thank you for all these years. I met you quite a few years ago in London Real Studios, a night, in a cold night, and I will always remember that. And from there, it's been a blast to evolve at your side and to be involved in so many projects. And just thank you for everything. For me, this is a dream. And
thank you, Luis. Thank you for getting involved in all this and doing this work. When I first met Brian, I went to the studio and you were kind of like, well, he's the guy doing the filming. He's not important. But then suddenly I began, over time as we've gotten to know ourselves, I realized, you're the wise one, in that relationship. And Brian's a great guy, but he's got a bit of ego. I guess we all do. And, I respect him, but I've come to realize how important you were to what he did, and how much, having you available to work on this project has been, such a gift, really, and not anything expected. I mean, that's kind of the amazing thing that destiny, has brought you into this project. You were not planning on doing this when you went to Peru.
Definitely not.
We're going to come up with some amazing things. So it's all good.
It's all good. It's all good. Looking forward to see you in flesh, maybe here in Cusco some point, having some medicine.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe later maybe in 2022. I hope for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
all right, my friend.
All right. Thank you. I really enjoyed this.